My name is Farzana Bashiri, she, her. Um, I just finished my PhD in science policy. Science policy is a field that shares a lot of theoretical grounds with fields like science and technology studies or sociology of science, in general, science studies and or higher education studies. There are fields that interrogate and investigate the intersection of science institutions, and politics and policy making, and how they influence one another and how that intersection looks like. This is a very broad definition. If a science policy expert wants to sit here and explain, there's never an agreement of what the field is because it's very interdisciplinary and practice oriented. So there is very different variations of approaches in this field. One way would be, for example, how specifically in STS or science and technology studies, they try to deconstruct the social processes that happen and go on behind the scenes. For example, how a scientific fact is constructed in the laboratory. So, like Bruno Latour's famous work on laboratory work and how science is constructed. So, it's a very constructivist in that specific field. They are very strong constructivist leaning. But then in science policy, more specifically, there is a lot of research on how science institutions work, for example, how the funding works and how the research agendas are steered, and yeah, these kind of questions, for example. I have a very multidisciplinary background myself. I am not really native to this field. I come from an engineering background. I studied mechanical engineering in my bachelor's in Iran. And there I soon really lost interest in that field, although that I was really passionate about it in the beginning. It was a very male-dominated environment, but also that was not the only problem, but it was very uncritical. It was really taken for granted how this field is kind of perpetuating and contributing to the status quo of many, for example, the environmental destruction and let alone the patriarchal dimensions of the field in itself. So that's why I really tried to shift, and then I pursued more critical and politically engaged field in environmental studies, and that's where I noticed it was a very unique environment for me, where researchers or scholars were very engaged, and they took their political role seriously, and there was not such illusion of neutrality. So that really shifted my perspective on how academia can be, and that's why I really tried to pursue a research in looking at that dimension of how science and politics, the interplay of science and politics, and the role of scholars in shaping societal change, and especially in a time of crisis that we find ourselves in. So that's what really motivated me to see these role models from in my own lived experience, and also experiencing the exact opposite of that in Iran. So my research topic in the field of science policy is academic activism or scholar activism. And this is not a typical topic in this field, although that the relation between science and politics have been broadly discussed in this field. But the role of scholars in more radical sense, and also from a bottom-up perspective, that how can scholars orient themselves to with the marginalized groups and in line with social justice goals, and also commit themselves to certain change, certain social and political change. That was very interesting for me, and I could see the gap in the research in our field, and I felt that there is a potential for contribution in a field that has traditionally investigated that kind of question, but not this very specific topic. That's why I chose to do this. There are many ways to look at the topic of my research, scholar activism, from a gender perspective. Um, The one that I felt most directly influenced by, maybe that's what I would like to bring up now, and that's that gender perspective applies to both academic work alone and activist work alone. And then when you bring them together, it can be also um, a double impact on the work on the task that a scholar activist might take on. Um, I want to mention that in our current academic system, very much driven by neoliberal ideas, and the ideas that influence how competitive and individualistic our works are as academics, and we have to constantly work to produce more and become more and more efficient in our how we spend our resources available, the resources that are also shrinking, but then do the same amount of output or even increasingly more with less work. And we have much bigger classrooms with many more students because universities increasingly rely on tuition fees and they need those sort of income when there are more and more funding cut, like this public funding is shrinking. And that means that you can have less space for care and a care work that has been traditionally marginalized or unappreciated in a patriarchal system. You can see that it's like an intersection of different systems that come together and make it even worse. And the space for care becomes more and more limited in all sorts of relationships, collegial relationships, a student mentorship relationship. You have less space, less time, and it's very difficult to slow down. So this is one dimension that I can see it in the academic work. But this in itself, this critique, like from the feminist ethics of care, you can have this bring this kind of activist critique to the academic work. So there is this one lens that you can apply, but even in the even in the activist setting, you see a similar tensions. There are many reflections that activists share about how in their own activist organizations, the same structures that they are fighting against, they are replicated unintentionally in their own relational dynamics. There is this book called The Entangled Activist, and there the activists reflect on, I think, on Extinction Rebellion and how they see that there are activists that want to change the system, but at the same time, they found themselves entangled in that system. So it is about working from within, but being aware of where we reproduce the same structures that we don't want to see them. For example, activists that work too hard, too much, and they organizing takes too much space that there is less space for care. And imagine these two coming together in one role. And if you want to be an academic activist, usually in academia, this is not a work that is rewarded. It is like if you there are certain forms of external engagement that are more rewarded and seen, like if you collaborate with industries, because there are that's a money generating form of collaboration. But if you collaborate with activists and NGOs or movements that are resource restrained, and then it's not so much incentive for that, and then that means that you have to take more space, more time, and energy from your personal care time, which is not even available to you in your ordinary workspace. You don't have that much care work, and that means that even you have to give away your personal care work time. And that makes it that from my observation, I have seen academic activists that work double shift. It's like their their whole life is taken, consumed by their work, which is I want to respect what they're doing because it seems very selfless in a way, but it's not sustainable. It's not really. Also, it might perpetuate a certain dynamic that we don't want to see, and we don't want to have a system that people are burnt out and overconsumed. Yes, I mean my understanding of our world is that we are agents within certain structures. And we are, of course, we have agency, meaning that we can make decisions that might go against what the structure would incentivize. We have that agency, we have that choice, but that means that there will be implications for that. If you are making an informed decision by a real analysis or a true analysis of your situation, of your context, then you probably know what is rewarded and what is not rewarded, and what will be punished, even, you know. So it is important to understand that we are not just certain individuals without a context, because that would lead to maybe a problematic understanding of how change should happen, and putting all the blame and the pressure on an individual without understanding the sensitivity or importance of the context of the context that includes multiple structures that one finds themselves in. Yes, the structures, I believe, do give different spaces to different individuals. Of course, men and women can be in different systems, find themselves differently treated, differently positioned in a system, and space available to them for different forms of action can be limited. At least for myself, coming from a background that is in a country that is explicitly patriarchal. And there you can even see in the legal system that how you have limited space on what kind of occupations or jobs you want to have, what kind of choices you have for your own future. So that's a very explicit system, and I think it's really helpful because no system is as purely liberated from patriarchy. And there you can have a sensitivity to also observe systems like in Swedish context, or many other more democratic contexts. There are still this kind of variations in the spaces that are different for women and men. Again, it's I think there is room or there is possibilities to open a space for more feminist approaches to academic work or scholar activist work in general. But we have to be aware that we are in a system that on a broader level kind of is opposing those values. So creating those spaces inevitably will take some investment in terms of energy, time, and all sorts of capital that one has. And then maybe it would be much easier for those who have a higher capital in academia. By capital, I mean and not only money, but it can include access to funding, but also legitimacy, credibility, a higher profile, a very fixed position, rather than precarious situations in academia. Those will give you a much bigger leverage to create such spaces. And I think there are these kind of generational works. There are collectives and smaller groups or academic environments that they have their own unique culture that is more caring, perhaps, and I mean, as caring as they can be within the limits that we find ourselves. It's not, I think we have to recognize all forces that exist. But I believe that I had experience in my own way, like how, for example, my mentors, they really tried to support me and sometimes even shield me to be able to do a kind of work that might not be seen as traditional in my own department or where I find myself in a business school. I could see that how they use their own capital to support me in my own research. I learned so much from the academic activists that I worked with, and I was always amazed and inspired by how they find hope, they find motivation in continuing while they immerse themselves in the struggle. So they are seeing the struggle firsthand. And what I can see is that first of all, it's possible. First of all, there are communities that are working to create something different, either through resisting or transforming and creating their own models and versions of what can be a future through this small micro dynamics that we create in our own, maybe a small research institute or a small academic activist environment, or just a mentorship relationship. Um, at the same time, I find theory very powerful. There are important, they have an important role in how we view the world, how we justify change, how we imagine change. And I think it's really helpful when we sometimes use liberating theories, emancipatory theories, that there are theories that maybe give us a view, a perspective that we are stuck and there's nothing to change about the world. And on the other hand, we have theories that actually help you to vision something else, to also even deconstruct those theories that give you or narratives that give you a sense that we are stuck. And I think in that sense, I found them really fascinating because a lot of the scholar activist work also happens in reflexive processes, that how I view my own role in the world, how I view change. And these are important backgrounds before one feels agency, one feels the political agency in themselves, and then act them out. So I think those processes really, just seeing that we have so many tools, so many intellectual work out there that have been shaped in close relation with praxis, with on-the-ground work. And they are not just ideas, there are ideas emerging from practice. So these really give me hope. And yeah, I think there is possibilities for the future.